So why are there so many sun gods all over the world? Why do they have so many common features? Well, today I'm going to teach you how to build a sun god from innate human instincts. So before we get into the idea of the sun god and how to build one, I want to talk a second about archetypes. So if you remember from the previous video, an archetype is a symbolic image or narrative that humans have a strong tendency to create. It's composed mostly of innate elements, meaning that they don't require any learning to really bring into being in the psyche. Now, I should point out that there is a considerable amount of gray area when it comes to the idea of innate things. What do we mean by innate? So something innate would be something that you don't require any learning to achieve in development. It doesn't have to be present at birth. Okay, it can be something that develops on its own naturally, but what we have to show to demonstrate that something is innate is that it will develop in pretty much any context on its own. So like reflexes, for example, are innate because you don't have to learn to have, say, the famous knee-jerk reflex. It's built into the system. But if we're going to say something is innate, then we're going to say it doesn't really hinge on a whole lot of learning. For example, the ability to play Beethoven's Fürelise piece on the piano. It's not innate. It requires a whole lot of learning. Now there is a gray area here. There are some things that require learning, but they don't require a whole lot of external learning. Rather they develop as a result of internal learning. So some good example of that would be the ability to walk. All of us learn how to walk, but we don't learn it from anyone in particular. We just teach ourselves through trial and error and body motion. So anything that falls under the innate, like no learning, or the self-learning, is fair game for the pieces that will come together to form an archetypal image. So an archetype is not just any narrative or image. It's a symbolic one. So what does that mean? So what we're talking about here is metaphors. And a metaphor is this very specific type of expression. It's where we'll take something like visual, spatial, something very concrete, and we'll use it to represent something more nebulous or more vague or impressionistic. And you'll see examples when I get further into it. But an archetypal image, being a symbol or metaphor, is going to work this way. Only the pieces that are used to create it are all pretty much innate or at least self-taught. Okay, so let's get into the sun god business. There's a lot of sun gods all over the world. There's Mesopotamian deities, where the sun is a manifestation of the supreme deity's sovereignty. There's sky gods, whose manifestation is through the sun. So it's not just the sun is represented as a deity. It's not just people looking at the sky and saying the sun is a god, although there are plenty of examples of that. There's a lot of variations on that too, meaning that the sun is oftentimes seen as not only just the supreme god, but it could also be the eye of the supreme god, or it could be the dwelling of the supreme god. It may be the most important child of the supreme god. But the key element that keeps being repeated is that the sun is manifestation of sovereignty, of the supreme deity. If there's many gods, then the sun is where the chief god is, or is manifest somehow. So in all these different places, the sun is seen as linked to the supreme deity. It's also linked to the deity who is in charge of fertility. So as opposed to other stellar elements or celestial elements like stars, moons, the sky, the clouds, the sun is the one that's almost always linked to fertility. That's interesting enough. The sun is typically related to a deity of knowledge and wisdom, and ancient wisdom, of the highest wisdom, of pervasive perfection, of harmony, So why is this? Why is it that people all over the world, regardless of what background they come from, keep putting together the same kind of metaphorical image? Well, that's because it's an archetype. Now, it's one thing to say something is an archetype. It's another thing to demonstrate why it's an archetype. Okay, that's the next step that I'm trying to make here. Because you can just look at it and say, well, it's a recurrent image that we have a strong tendency to make. But the burden of proof rests with the claimant on that. It means I need to show exactly why it is that we might have a tendency to create something like that. So that's what we're going to get into right now. But I want to go through 6 different elements first that I'm going to argue are innate, that when you combine them together give you a sun god. Okay, so the first one is that we all have a tendency to link intense emotion with heat. Okay, why is that? Well, it's because when we have intense anger or intense affect or passion, our blood pressure will go up and our temperature will literally increase a little bit. It's part of our physiology. So anyone who happens to be a member of the species Homo sapiens is going to have this experience. So it's something we learn, but it's self-taught. It's not anything that's really part of our culture, really. It could be anywhere, and you'd have this if you happen to be a human, anyway. Okay, but what else? Okay, so there's another. That's one metaphor. So heat equals intense affect. So note the metaphor here. I'm taking something concrete and physical, heat, and I'm mapping it onto a concept or an idea. Now, we all do this. It's all part of our natural human thought process. But the specific things that we link together are based on our common experiences. Okay, so heat linking to intense affect is one of them. Another one is height linked to superiority or advantage or power. Remember, the second part of the metaphor is going to be something that's kind of vague, it's a little bit ineffable. That's why we use symbols, to make it understandable. So strength, power, advantage, superiority, supremacy are all going to be linked to height. But why would that be? The reason we have that is because all of us experience, again, our physiological makeup, which says being upright is superior to falling over, right? Because we're bipedal organisms. We walk around. It's important for us to stay upright so that we maintain our ability to move and defend ourselves. So it's very ingrained. Not to mention, everyone has the experience of people way up here having way more power than we do. So, I mean, that's just any child has that experience. So, again, it doesn't seem to be anything that needs to be specifically externally learned. Like from the culture, I have to get this idea that things that are high up are what we use to represent things that are powerful. It's just a natural connection that we're all going to make, no matter what culture we're from, no matter what our background is. Okay, so that's an archetypal element, in my opinion. Okay, here's another one. Light. Everywhere in the world you see the connection between light and knowledge or safety. Why? Well, again, this goes back to our physiology. We are highly visual organisms. We are more comfortable in settings of light because that's our main way of understanding the world, through vision. If we were rats, say, who primarily use scent and in fact are afraid of light because it means predators could get them, they wouldn't make this connection. Okay, but we're not rats, most of us anyway. We're humans, and humans connect light with knowledge. And you can see this in everyday conversation. In fact, I just used it. I said you can see this. I meant is that you can understand it. But it's so ingrained in our way of thinking that we connect the two without even really realizing it. Okay, so what about the next one? So the fourth one is the person is a complex phenomenon. This is just a fact of personification, right? All of us do it. You can watch toddlers do it. They will play with little stuffed animals and personify them and treat them like they have personalities. Why is that? It's because we're a very cooperative species. We work together. So in order for that to make sense or for it to work, we all have to be born with a strong tendency to personify so that we can understand others as if they were thinking like we do. Okay, what about symmetry representing balance or harmony? So this is another one that's tied into our physiology. Balance is required for us to survive being upright bipedal creatures. We need to maintain our balance. Our neural system is very strongly designed to keep us balanced. So it's going to be a natural connection for us to equate balance with safety, with the preferable state to be in, rather than being imbalanced, which means you could fall over and be in danger. So we all have a natural tendency to prefer symmetry visually in terms of aesthetics. So now the symmetry one leads us to the last one, which is that the round shape of a circle is going to naturally lend itself to being symbolically equated with concepts of wholeness or perfection. In fact, the circle is the most symmetrical, mathematically speaking, the most symmetrical object there is anyway. So it's a natural tie-in there. It's a natural symbol. So let's combine all of these things. Now remember, these are all universal. All of these things that I just, so heat being linked to intense affect, height being linked to superior position, light being linked to knowledge and safety, the tendency to personify things, meaning that we treat something as if it were a human being, the connection between symmetry and harmony or perfection or balance, and the connection between roundness and wholeness. We combine all of these things. They're all just waiting there. It doesn't take a whole lot of thought or imaginative capacity to put them all together when we're looking at the sun. Because the sun contains the heat, it contains the light, the superior position, it contains the symmetry, the round shape, and all we have to do is personify it. Poof, we've got a sun god on our hands. It's not going to require a whole lot of cultural learning. I think if you took any group of random people and then like displaced them somewhere and cut them off from any sort of media and asked them to create their own symbols, the sun would be a natural one that would emerge from that as somehow connected with the supreme deity. So if we're contemplating ideas of God or the gods or deeper and higher meaning, the sun's a great symbol for those things because of its qualities and how they connect to our own physiology. So the sun god or the sun goddess then is an archetype. And it's that way because it's built almost entirely out of these archetypal elements that are either innate or they're self-taught at a very early age. The sun god or goddess is so widespread because it's composed almost entirely of these archetypal elements, the ones that we listed before. It doesn't take a whole lot for anyone in particular, when they're contemplating these things, to come up with the idea that the sun makes a good image or symbol for those concepts. That's why you see it repeated all over the world, the same kinds of metaphorical connections.